How'd you like to listen to .NET Rocks with no ads? Easy. Become a patron. For just $5 a month, you get access to a private RSS feed where all the shows have no ads. $20 a month will get you that and a special .NET Rocks patron mug. Sign up now at patreon.netrocks.com. Hey, Carl and Richard here with your 2024 NDC schedule.
We'll be at as many NDC conferences as possible this year, and you should consider attending no matter what. The Copenhagen Developers Festival happens August 26th through the 30th. Tickets at cphdevfest.com.
NDC Porto is happening October 14th through the 18th. The early bird discount ends June 14th. Tickets at ndcporto.com.
And we'll see you there, we hope.
Hey, guess what? It's .NET Rocks. I'm Carl Franklin.
And I'm Richard Campbell.
And Billy Hollis is here. Billy, you can chime in anytime because
Yeah.
I think
you're past the threshold.
I appreciate that. I do, and I might, but I know you guys have early show things you need to do, so I'll let you go ahead and do that.
Not your first rodeo.
Well, Billy, I don't know. I kind of think you're really going to love my Better Know framework. And there's 2 of them for today. So by all means, feel free to jump in after we roll the crazy music.
Let's go. All right, man, what do you got?
All right, so I have a link to a Reddit rant. And it's all about somebody who's ranting about XAML or WPF, right? So here we go. WPF XAML frustrations. Bill, you're going to love this. This is good. And this is from 3 years ago. I am attempting to broaden my C# abilities by making different UI projects. I've had 2 experiences with XAML. Once at making a simple phone app, another just now while trying to make a personal project. Both have been incredibly infuriating. The first time I would just assume I was being dumb, but now I feel as though XAML is just a steaming pile of dog shit.
Nice.
Anytime I edit a file .xaml or .cs, Visual Studio loses its fucking mind and throws the most ridiculous errors that have nothing to do with the problem. And I think that's more about Visual Studio, not about XAML. But half the time, some magical XAML.g.cs file breaks for no good reason. In parentheses, no, it's not the common problem namespaces being wrong. Cleaning and or rebuilding the solution does not remove those errors. I have to let it happen, clear the file, and save it over again. Again, nothing else in the code changes. Just saving over these file generated files fixes it. Then when I go to launch the project, it will not bring up the main view 75% of the time. Without changing my code, just some seemingly random combination of cleaning and rebuilding allows it to start again. I'm way better with back-end stuff, so maybe I'm doing something horribly wrong. I read the documentation, searched for solutions to my particular errors, and checked every detail, but still feel like XAML is an uphill battle. End of rant. And then he goes on, and people try to talk him off the ledge, but Billy, I thought...
Well, XAML is an uphill battle.
I thought you'd get a kick out of that.
Learning how to use it effectively is hard. Yeah. It's the C++ of internet presentation.
It's just waiting with a 0 pointer to nuke everything.
But you can do things with it that are difficult, impractical, or in a few cases, impossible to do with other common UI technologies. Right. And once you do learn how to do it, and you learn to switch your mind and how to think about it, then you can create experiences for the users that have enormous value. It's worth it. But I've never been one to say that you should just jump into XAML and start using it. And no, it's a real uphill struggle. I mean, look, I made a lot of money training people in XAML for many years because I constructed an approach to help people switch from the way they think about programming in regular code, C# or whatever, which is an imperative way of
and as
doing
I said,
logic.
I think this guy's problem was clearly 100% Visual Studio.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
I read a little further down the line there. He was using MVVM cross. So I wonder if he wasn't using it well, because you have to approach those libraries with their intent. So I suspect he may have been just fighting with MVVM. And let's face it, when you mess with something related to the library, it's going to spew terrible messages. You're going to have a tough time.
All right. So I have something else that I want to bring up in Better Know Framework. I actually have two things. So XAML for Blazor came out last year. Now, XAML for Blazor is the brainchild of Giovanni Albani, who's the guy behind OpenSilver. And it's also based on OpenSilver. So this is basically unleash the power of XAML in your Blazor applications. Yeah. So and OpenSilver was sort of an open source version of Silverlight that Giovanni started. In fact, we interviewed him twice.
Yep.
Yeah,
when
we
he was
interviewed him in
and when he delivered it.
Exactly, in 2020 and in 2021 when he delivered it. And so this is interesting stuff. So if you want to get on the web and Silverlight was the end all be all for you, and you liked XAML in the browser, XAML for Blazor, XAML-for-blazor.com. Check it out.
That's been on my list to check out for a while.
Yeah, it sounds like a show in the making, isn't it?
I've done most of my stuff in that space with the Uno platform.
Yeah.
And that has worked out pretty well in general. It was a real road there over the last 5 or 6 years to get that complete and stable, especially for the web. Some of the early stuff they did.
Yeah. Uno did a lot of twists and turns because they came into the game as a UWP platform and realized they needed to transform and did.
Yeah.
Like quite an accomplishment, really.
So they're an interesting alternative to Xamarin now for multi-platform stuff. And so I've been spending time with that. But yes, I'd like to take a look at XAML for Blazor because I really do hope that the responsiveness of the Blazor engine will be the way to get a lot of the experiences I want to see in just normal websites.
Awesome.
And I'm not gonna stop on the whole Visual Studio Challenge thing. I often had problems like that, even with Maui in Visual Studio with XAML, overwriting and generating files and them being out of sync and stuff. It's better now. But one of the things that's cool about the web platform is the whole rendering process, right? You don't typically have those problems but the end product you're looking at is just pure markup, right? In code or whatever. So anyway, that's my rant.
Nice.
Who's talking to us, Richard?
Grabbed a comment off of Billy's last show, the one we did back in December 22. Episode 1822, coincidental numbers. By the way, I believe this is your 24th episode, Billy. So
man.
Okay.
I do believe we owe you like a sack of submarines at this point. It's you were a guest on episode 3.
3. Yeah.
And here you are now on, what is this? Episode 1915. So
right.
I can't believe people aren't just tired of listening to me.
Well, I'm not. I call you routinely because I see the work you're doing. I'm like, oh, dude, I want to talk about that. Right.
Yeah.
Like that's the reality.
Always doing something new. I'm too easily bored to keep doing the same stuff. So
exactly.
True. Still. So that last episode was thinking high level design, which I thought was really enjoyable. We had a great conversation there, and the audience seemed to agree because lots of messages. And this one's from Ismo, who said this sounded like a fun episode of discourse with Billy, Carl, and Richard. It really got some wheels turning in a discussion. One particular part of the episode that stood out for me was when Billy mentioned the idea that companies, quote, have designers, but they don't know how to implement design thinking and produce great high level design. Similarly, I find we can apply the same logic to most enterprise architects. They know how to organize and dive deep into code and maybe how to output some pretty nice cloud diagrams, but we seem to fail spectacularly in putting all the pieces together to make a very well put together piece of software. High level design thinking could fix this if only we could get out of our own way.
I can't argue with any of that.
Well, and my immediate thought is, where do most architects come from? This is my only promotion path as a developer. So you're sort of driven into the architectural role, whether it's a natural fit for you or not, and you rarely get additional training. And so this idea of being that architectural leadership of really being, responsible for the shape of your project. I just don't know that anybody takes that on intentionally. You eventually realize it needs to be done, or you don't, and it's a weak spot in the whole thing.
There isn't really an education path for it.
Right.
Yeah.
So somebody has to kind of have some natural talent and try things out. Maybe they have a mentor if they're lucky, but the supply of enterprise architects who are actually good at what they do is so limited that it's hard to find a mentor and do things. Yeah. You have to solve real problems to do it. And we really don't have anything. We have less than 10% of the expertise in enterprise architecture that we need in this profession.
Well, in going back to design, aptitude. I have a story from my own family. My daughter, Emmy, as a junior in high school, turns out she had ridiculous artistic talent, right? She was doing 3D models, and she met with one of her mentors who said, you should go in for industrial design. So she went to Rhode Island School of Design, which is the most prestigious design school on the East Coast. And RISD, and got a degree in industrial design. And I said to her, hey, can you help me with like some web stuff? She's like, I don't want to do web stuff. Hey, can you help me with some graphics? Nah, I don't want to do graphics. She was like, I want to do industrial design. Guess what she's doing now?
What's that?
Web design.
Web design.
Yeah. Because it pays.
Well, she's doing it on the side.
Right.
But she has.
Well, that's the easy way to get into design.
Yeah.
And it is look, I go to a lot of meetings of like meetups for designers, for visual designers. And I talk to a lot of people at conferences and things like that. And we've reached a point now where those people, for a lot of the decision makers in business, those web designers, that's what design is.
Yeah.
As far as executives are concerned.
Right.
That's not really healthy, because that's why I started to talk more about design thinking instead of just design, because the term design is so overloaded.
Yeah, it's overloaded.
Sure.
So, Ismo, thank you so much for your comment, and a copy of Music to Go By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Go By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks. We publish every show there. And if you comment there and I read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Go By.
And Music to Go By still going strong.
Yeah.
And people are still loving it. Helps you stay in focus while you code or do anything. Deep work is a term I heard today.
I like that.
Talking about deep work. All right. So let me formally introduce Billy Hollis, in case you've been sleeping under a rock for the last 20 years. Billy is a software designer and developer with a contrarian streak that often challenges conventional wisdom in the industry. Is that true, Richard? Contrarian streak?
No. If you need two testers for every developer, you must suck as a developer.
End quote. He has a consulting practice in Nashville, Tennessee, USA. He and his team focus on user experience design, which is UX, advanced user interface development, rules-based architectures, and healthcare systems. He teaches classes for design thinking and UX design and technical classes on XAML for WinUI and XAML for WPF. Okay, there you go. Your official bio for today, Billy.
There you go.
Yeah.
And what the bio never says, because there's no good way to put it in there, is that what I really am is a generalist. And I decided that all the way back in high school.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to be. In an economy where everybody tells you to specialize, I already decided I was going to be a generalist.
When I first met you, and again, at least 20 years ago now, you were much more an app architect personality. I watched you evolve into someone who cared deeply about design.
Well, you watched me expose it.
Yeah, perhaps that's true.
But I cared about it before that. It's just that nobody else in the industry did, so I didn't talk about it then.
Well, and the tech also changed. Like you were there first when XAML emerged, and you were long before Microsoft knew what the heck to do with it. You were already gunning away.
Well, that was the reason I embraced it so much, is that sensibility about doing design. Remember, my first book in 1999 has the title Design, Specification, and Objects. Which kind of helps you understand that I was moving in that direction even earlier.
Yeah.
But nobody cared about it until some of the technologies came out to be able to do some of these interesting things.
1999, when the word objects was novel.
Was novel, yeah. and the iPhone was one of the breakpoints to put people into a new way of thinking.
We all learned the word
design. So that's why I began talking about it more. I cared about it before that, and I've certainly learned a huge amount in the last 15 years. But I always cared more about it than most people in the industry.
Right. So you're thinking these days about how to make design pay. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, see, that's because the entire area is confused. I talked about this. You go to a typical person running a software development team, and somebody tells him, man, you need a designer. And he goes to HR. What are they going to get? They're probably going to get a web designer because that's just what the industry kind of thinks.
Right.
Well, the term design thinking is to help break loose from that, because from my perspective, that kind of visual oriented design is the lowest step above not doing design at all.
Hamburger menu or no hamburger menu?
Yeah. It's, and I don't mean to say it doesn't have any value, because it does. Nobody wants an ugly application or website, right. And proper layout and good cosmetics do in fact increase the quality and value of websites and of apps. But when you start getting into interaction, now the potential for design to do things goes up. And there's a spectrum that goes all the way up to business process reengineering, designing entirely new ways for a business to operate. Design thinking embraces that entire spectrum. And I want people in the industry to kind of understand, what level are you at? Because what level you're at now determines what kind of people do you need to get to help you.
Billy, sometimes you know this, the simplest decision, should it go here or here, can make the difference between some process that takes an hour and a process that takes 10, 15 minutes. The simplest decision.
There's a famous article that's still relevant called the $6 Million Button.
Yeah.
You've probably seen that article one time or another. And if you Google that, anybody that's listening can Google that and get the article on how moving a button saves $6 million.
Are banks the worst? Bank websites the worst in your opinion? I mean, in my opinion, Richard's nodding.
Yeah.
In my opinion, so I have a local bank, and I wouldn't trade them for the world. They're the best because they're local. Even when I go to like the virtual ATM, like the people that come on screen, oh, hey, Carl, how's it going? How's the band? Right? Like I feel connected to this bank. And yet the process for doing ACH payments, which is, direct deposit payments, requires you to go to a screen, see a list of the last payments that you did that goes all the way down to Texas, and to start a new one, you have to scroll all the way to the bottom and hit new.
Nice.
And then after you do a new one, it goes to the bottom again. And so you have to sort by date and then sort by date again to get to what you just put in so you can edit it. And this is the dumbest fucking thing I've ever seen. And it's a bank.
Well, yeah, banks are some of the worst offenders. And there really isn't much excuse for that. My 88-year-old mom does online banking. And they keep changing the site. Now, look, she's smart, and she did eventually learn to do her online banking. In fact, she prefers it now. Her mobility is more limited than it used to be. So not having to trot down to the bank is a big help for her. But I mean, when she calls me once every year or two, they've changed the page and I don't understand what.
They made it easier, Mom.
They didn't make it easier. That's the problem. In many cases, they just changed it for the sake of change.
Yeah.
Now, the banks are learning and they are getting better. My bank, US Bank, actually does a pretty good job with their website and just an excellent job with the app that they put on the phone. So they're kind of learning this, but I hear complaints about banking sites and apps all the time.
I guess if it works, that's enough for them, right? Because people are going to be able to do, and it doesn't matter how frustrating it is for them, they'll do it.
That was a quote that I coined way back in probably 2011, was that for most of the time in this industry, just making something possible was enough that people consider themselves successful.
Right.
But it really shouldn't be. You also should consider making it easy as part of your success.
And enjoyable even. Shall we even go that far? Yeah. Delightful.
But okay. We talk about the $6 million button. The real question always is, you're delaying writing code, messing around with this design stuff. Let's just get to work.
Yeah. And my perspective on that is, and having been involved in a ton of projects, both with and without design up front, all the way back to PC stuff in the 80s and late 70s, I have never seen a project where doing design up front wasted time or took more time until you finally got delivery. And the reason is it eliminates a lot of blind alleys.
Right.
I mean, if you don't do design, you're going to end up doing things that you take to people and they go, no, this isn't what I needed, or this isn't good now, or I hate this, and then have to do rework on it. So the idea that you need to start coding first, I mean, back end stuff, I guess maybe. Even there, though, I think the back end is sometimes more affected by what goes on with the user than a lot of developers tend to think.
But even the developers, and they do, dare I say, test their apps in development, they have to test them. So the idiot that designed that page had to fill the screen with dummy data and scroll all the way to the bottom. You would think he said, hey, I got an idea. Let's put these buttons at the top of the page. He
probably
think.
only had 3 records. Like he never considered that somebody would have more.
You're probably right.
Yeah.
But you've got that psychology, Carl, and I've got it too, that I see these flaws and they irritate me. I have an emotional response to these flaws. But I can tell you that a lot of developers don't.
Yeah. My wife does. My wife uses an app and she can't figure out. She's like, some damn programmer screwed this up.
And I think that's good.
Yeah.
Especially for developers, they ought to be offended by poor design on behalf of the users. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is I've run into a lot of developers that just, scroll? Okay, fine. Whatever. I mean, they're paying me by the hour. What does it matter to me how much I scroll?
Kelly's mother is a Southern belle from Missouri, right? So anytime anything screws up, she'll always say, some man probably designed this.
I will say that in general, while the difference isn't great, the women in this industry do pretty well at design and maybe somewhat better than the men. Yeah. Now, there are men who do a great job, but there are more men who just aren't any good at it at all. So the women win on average.
And I wonder if it's just a lack of awareness, like you're not noticing that this UX could be better.
Well, and that's why some of the very first stuff I ever started talking about in seminars and such for UX was about the principles of how the brain works and how the visual system works, because that sensitizes you to things that if you know why something doesn't work well, why don't people like to scroll? Well, that does not work in concert with the visual and cognitive systems. Right. You're constantly having to refresh and absorb new material, which causes cognitive effort as well as wasted time. So when you start to learn some of these principles about how the brain and the eyes work, now you tend to notice things more that don't work in concert with them, and thereby slow people down and frustrate them.
Do you do a lot of reworking of legacy apps, Billy?
Well, I personally don't do a lot. I do some. And that's probably 15-20% of my work. But in terms of people being interested in it, that's a very highly ranked topic, because let's face it, lots of teams have these legacy apps that there are many millions of dollars invested in, and they have yet to experience the pressure to replace that and move to new technologies. Typically, a platform change or a dramatic business change causes people to move to new platforms, and that's when they typically involve me. Yeah. But most people aren't in that situation, so I've been doing a session lately on UX design for legacy apps that's been pretty popular. I've done it at several conferences.
That's good. I have a customer, and I looked at this legacy app that I was upgrading. I said, how old is this? And they said, since about episode 800. That's about
that would be what, 2013-ish?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. So I've still got your list of shows up there. So yeah, it would have been about 2013, 2012.
I basically remember that because episode 600 was the one that introduced, using the joke you talked about there, Richard, where I was going on about some of the people whose heads in the cloud about how you do development and all the extra testing and all the stuff that goes with it. Right. And we did that on stage in San Diego.
Yep.
In 2010, I think.
That was so much
fun.
And
I remember Richard falling off the chair when I
me too.
punched the line of that joke.
You couldn't revive me.
Yeah.
So tell us about this talk on legacy apps, design for legacy apps.
On legacy apps, yeah. It came about because of something interesting that I hadn't planned it, because since I don't normally do that work, a lot of my talks are based on the work that I've actually done. In this case, though, I do sessions for people for free to sort of introduce them to the whole idea of design. And that's partially because we don't have salesmen. We don't do traditional marketing. So that introduces me to people. The primary way that I find new people to work with is the conferences and going to and doing sessions and talking to people in depth there. But I hit upon another way a few years back when the virtual stuff became very easy to do is, if people want to lunch and learn, well, let's put me on the screen, man. I'll talk for 45 minutes about some topic. And I had a list of them, and I had somebody that asked me to do it, looked at my list, and nothing really lit them up. And they said, well, we're stuck with this legacy app. What advice would you give us about applying design? So I wrote a whole new session on that. And it was very successful, and I started doing it at conferences too. And it gets bigger audiences typically than my sessions on how you redesign an app from scratch.
Step 1. Burn it down.
That's a problem, isn't it? And so I started thinking about it and thinking, well, what if you are stuck in kind of a legacy world? First of all, I understand why. Mm-hmm. Because trying to change out an entire application that runs a business is an enormously risky proposition.
Yeah.
And it's expensive too. But I think, honestly, I don't think it's the expense that drives people away from it mostly. I think it's the risk because it's an existential threat if you get it wrong. So improving a legacy app. Well, okay, where would you want to improve legacy apps? So I made a list of the areas that I had seen that I thought worked well. Search was very high on the list. A lot of legacy apps have very poorly designed search because it was designed 20 years ago or whatever. And our database technologies are better now. We can do full text indexing and all that kind of stuff where 20 years ago we couldn't. And it surprises me how many corporate apps still require you to search by entering information in different fields. If I want to search for address, I have to enter something in a field for address. Whereas the world has gone beyond that, haven't they? I mean, everybody just kind of types in a bar.
Have these programmers ever heard of link?
Yeah.
It's like, or an or, maybe?
So search is an obvious candidate, and it's not so much just that you change so that you enter into a Google style bar. It's more about how you expose the results. Yeah. Because right now, developers just dump it in a data grid. And that's okay, actually, for some interaction cases, especially if people are going to kind of sort and massage the data a lot, then data grid's okay to do that. But we've got card views and all the stuff and graphics that we can put in there.
I'm working on an app right now, Billy, where we leave it up to the user to decide whether they want to see stuff in a grid or in cards.
Oh, I'll be interested in the results of that.
Simple.
And part of it is how well designed are the cards, of course. But in general, if the cards are well designed, I find that people tend to prefer that because this gets back to some of the neurological things. The part of our brains that works with graphics and shapes and color is much older in evolutionary terms than the part that reads and then interprets numbers and
certainly the part that reads spreadsheets.
Yeah.
That's kind of new.
So in essence, there's an ease of absorbing the material when you're leaning on graphics and such. For example, if you've got 5 categories of returned results and you've got a graphic for each one, the eyes will be able to use that graphic to zero in on the one they want very quickly. And it actually feels good because anything that helps your brain offload cognitive effort feels good. Right. It's at a subconscious level, but people tend to be attracted to and become attached to those kind of views if they leverage graphics well. Now, if they do a lousy job and the graphics are just as hard to figure out as the text, then you don't get any benefit.
But I like the card idea because, when you put a border around something, it's a thing. It has a boundary. It's a thing. Whereas a line in a grid,
it can just be some space around it. Yeah. And it's still a group. It's still a thing.
But a line in a grid is much more difficult for the brain to understand. Oh, that's a thing.
Much more.
But aren't you getting to a point here where you're trying to punt on the design and saying, let the user define how they want to see things?
Well,
Well, in this case, there were users that wanted a table and there were users that wanted cards. So we had this, design meeting. They were yelling back and forth and stuff. And I'm like, hey,
we can do both.
We'll just do both.
It's a Boolean in a JSON file.
Yeah, it'll be okay.
Now, see, I use that approach quite a lot because you do get into confrontations, typically because the range of users is such that there are advanced users and there are simpler users. And I really don't like the idea of hamstringing everybody because some power users need some things.
Yeah. And definitely you get that split between the novice users that are going to use that app once a week and the person that's in there 4 out of 8 hours of a given working day. And they want all the shortcuts. They want to be as efficient as possible because they're in and out of there so often.
So that's very smart to do that, Carl. And because it does short circuit a lot of the resistance you get to change.
Yeah.
Because
there is on both sides.
There is status quo bias among people that people tend to like what they're comfortable with, what they're used to. And overcoming that, well, first of all, you have to do some good work and come up with a good design. Just trying to make minor changes typically doesn't really work very well to get those people off the button for the old stuff. But if you come up with something really new, then they're more likely to see that and realize that that's better. But yeah, in general, you are going to have, in many cases, two groups, and you just can't reconcile between the two.
And they're both valuable and important. It's just, I would say occasionally I've certainly seen apps where nobody spends enough time in it to be good at it, right? Where the leadership leading you all the time model is what everybody ends up using because it's like, I go into this thing once a week. I go into this thing, once a month. Nobody's ever going to be good at it.
Yeah. And unfortunately, because there are parts of the app that are used quite a lot, that's where you tend to put your investment because that's where your payback is. So those parts of the app very often are not as well designed because you just don't have time to do everything.
You can't tune everything up. Tune up the thing that's going to give you the biggest return.
Do you remember, Billy, we got to take a break, so I'll make this quick. But do you remember I wrote this tool for Windows Forms that was sort of like UI beginner, intermediate, and expert mode levels, and you could tie those to the different visible properties of controls. And so the user could say, I want to be in beginner mode because they're just learning the app. And so it kind of guides them through the easy stuff. Go to intermediate, shows a few more features. Expert shows a few more features. I really like that. And I've used that metaphor ever since. It's a great metaphor, and it works even better with modern technologies where you've got dynamic layout. Yeah.
And that responsive layout. The problem in more static environments like Windows Forms was, okay, now I'm leaving holes in the screen. And some people don't like that. Right. But I think that's an excellent approach. You just don't want to clutter a screen with stuff that somebody's not going to use. And so that's one really good architectural way to sort of give it enough flexibility that you're accommodating a wider range.
And the one thing that you have to be careful with that, kids, is that you have to make the option to go to the next level discoverable enough so that people don't get stuck and say, where is all the stuff?
Yeah. In general, I mean, that's a great example of configuration. We put a lot of configurability in our apps, and configurability is one of the ways that you do try to bypass a lot of these blockages, these where people are butting heads about the way that, in fact, I've seen cases where a team would thrash for 6 months over something fundamentally fairly simple.
Yeah. Spike them. Do them both.
Do them both. Yeah. Stop arguing about it. Just do them both.
Code. It's a radio button.
So we do a lot of configurability. In fact, I think a good architecture for applications ought to have some pipelines for configurability built into it. Mm-hmm. That it ought to be really easy to implement configurability in the UI instead of having to kludge up some code to do it. I mean, you're in your thing to sort of tag the stuff at what level is an example of that kind of configurability.
All right. And with that, we're going to take this very brief pause for these very important messages. And I'd like to remind you that if you don't want to hear these messages, you can become a $5 a month patron at patreon.netrocks.com, and you can get a feed that is ad free. All right. Now here comes the annoying part. We'll be right back. Did you know you can lift and shift your .NET Framework apps to virtual machines in the cloud? Use the Elastic Beanstalk service to easily migrate to Amazon EC2 with little or no changes. Find out more at aws.amazon.com/elasticbeanstalk. And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Carl Franklin. It's my friend Richard Campbell.
Hey.
And we're talking about our friend Billy Hollis, the Right Reverend Billy Hollis. And he's got some good ideas about design, about the design for legacy systems,
for legacy apps,
and all those little things.
Some of the other areas besides search, data visualization. I mean, we got all this wonderful ability to do data visualization with our modern UI technologies, but how much data visualization do you see in the typical corporate app? I mean, they might get a charting package and do a few pie charts and bar charts, and that's about it. Whereas a custom designed data visualization can sometimes not only speed people up and keep them from making mistakes, but it can also communicate to the user, hey, I understand where you live and work, and I've developed this software for you. They tend to have an unconscious, favorable understanding of what you do if you accommodate them in those kinds of ways. So data visualization is very underused. I mean, I see dashboards and they've just got the most common looking stuff. It's just a whole bunch of line charts or whatever.
I thought we were done with pie charts. Apparently pie charts haven't died yet.
Yeah. Well,
pie charts were always bad.
Yeah. But somebody wants a dashboard. Some decision maker wants one. Okay. We do a dashboard. Now what do we put on it? Well, they don't think about that. And that's really too bad because dashboards by their nature ought to be very dynamic. You ought to be able to do new widgets for a dashboard anytime you want.
Right.
And when I've seen that, when companies have adopted that attitude, now you get some really, really useful dashboards. Things that contain, here's the top 5 things that you need to worry about right now.
Right.
And
that's where visualizations like the sort of up and to the right graph says, okay, if it's going up to the right, good things are happening. If it's going down to the right, it's bad thing happening. Green arrows and red arrows.
But certainly data visualization is one of those design things that you have to take into account. Sort of a typical, you have to do some sketching, really. If you're going to do a good data visualization, you start with pencil and paper.
Do you like tools like Figma? Like where do you sketch up your app designs?
I'm fine with almost any wireframing tool, and Figma is very popular right now. My partner, Gary Bailey, who's does quite a lot of that work in our case, likes Balsamiq. And I think there are some advantages for Balsamiq over Figma.
I like it.
Psychologically, Balsamiq looks like a sketch and Figma does not.
Right.
And when I take wireframes to people, I want them to critique them. Well, if they look like a sketch, psychologically, they go, oh, yeah, I guess it's just an idea. Figma looks more like a finished screen.
It's Balsamiq with a Q.
Right.
So I'm not as fond of Figma as a lot of people are, but what Figma does do, and I think the reason why a lot of web design kind of people take to it is you do get something that's very representative of what's actually going to be put on the page. Whereas Balsamiq does not do that. And since those people are more concerned with the aesthetics and the visual stuff, Figma tends to be the tool that they go to. But the basic idea for all of these is don't start with them.
Yeah.
Don't walk up to an electronic tool to design your screens. Get a pencil and paper, man. Go out there and think about how that thing's going to be laid out and try 2 or 3 or 4 different ideas for how you do it so you can compare them.
Sorry, pencil and paper? Pencil? What?
Yeah. That technology's been around for 2,000 years now.
Random access.
I like the resolution.
Yeah, great resolution.
Well, great battery life.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Never run out of battery.
And the storage capacity is just
I was a big
endless.
believer in the whiteboard too. That just
drawing
things out.
Basically, when I teach classes on how to do design mostly to developer teams, I emphasize use any media you want as long as it's blank. Don't do lined paper. That flips some switches in your head.
And when you're done with your design on the whiteboard, take a picture. Because guess what? The cleaning crew's coming in and it's going to be gone tomorrow.
Yeah. So especially collaborative design with 2 or 3 people, whiteboards work really well. But one of the options that has been particularly popular among the people that I've worked with in recent years is butcher paper.
Oh.
Butcher paper. You might not think, well, it comes in rolls.
Yeah.
So you think about the tables that are in the typical conference room. Unroll about 6 or 8 feet of butcher paper.
Everybody got a corner.
Everybody's got a piece of it. And everybody kind of, so that gets past the thing of, some people like to kind of sit back and let other people do all the work, all the sketching. So now, okay, you got your piece. Don't tell me what you want me to sketch. Go ahead and sketch it yourself. And then when you want to store the finished drawings, you just roll them up.
Right.
Put a rubber band around
Now, are you talking about the light green butcher paper or the pink barbecue butcher paper? Not the pink barbecue wrapping stuff? Because I figured that's what you would pick. Is the pink paper.
It's the pink paper. No, you want white paper. You don't want any psychological whatever predisposing people in any direction. White is the best color there. We can put a link for the show in the product I use on Amazon, if you like, an Amazon link that points to the roll of butcher paper. It's about 150 feet and I think about 14 inches wide.
That's great.
And so, that's a really good option for teams. But I like whiteboards, especially in the early stages where you're trying to figure out a little bit more about the flow. Yep. But, there are lots of ways to do it as long as you use blank media and pencils. Colored pencils are nice.
Yeah.
And colored markers are nice. They
Crayons.
help you emphasize some things, but blank paper.
Very good. And again, take pictures of it because it's going to end up in the garbage someday.
Well, like I said, it rolls back up again, so you can keep it compact.
Yeah, that's that's one of the reasons I love butcher paper. Easy to pack up and take home and unroll when I need it. So that has worked really well. And I don't think I've ever had a team that used it before I came in, but they all like it after I
tried pizza boxes once, but the pencils didn't work in the grease spots.
Nice.
So you have to do a lot of sketching for data visualization. And then the other area that for legacy apps, I tend to suggest to people is to do some work on workflow, because you think about these apps that have been developed 15, 20 years ago, they tended to have that model of basically the app replicates what's in the database. The menu replicates what's in the database. Yeah. So a lot of CRUD screens, getting data in and out is the primary thing that the app is doing. So you think about workflow with an app like that, you got 5 steps in a workflow. You probably have to go to 5 different places in the app to do it.
Yeah.
And understand that we talk about those principles, those cognitive, et cetera, principles. One of the basic standard principles is that short-term memory is limited and cognitive effort is limited. You stress people out if you make them think too much. So think about now workflow in a legacy app. If you got to bounce around to 5 different places to do 5 steps, you're having to store in your short-term memory where you are and what you have to do next and expend the cognitive effort to kind of remember where all these things are. Well, leave that in place. Don't take away any of those things, but you can develop an add-on that steps people through the steps and links straight to the thing that they need to do.
Billy.
And tracks where they are.
You do stand-up comedy too, right?
I do.
Because I feel a routine coming on. You know, you could mimic Jeff Foxworthy. You might have bad design if you find yourself pulling up Notepad between screen A and screen B, you might have bad design. That's
and I actually did say, I was doing user observation and saw a woman, she would work with a record and write down the 9-digit ID on her pad so that she could come back to it later. What she was doing on the fly was constructing a recently used list on paper.
Right.
And why, man, let's let the computer keep up with that. Why are we making her do it?
At least let them use the clipboard, for crying out loud.
Yeah. So workflow is a great way to add a lot of value. Think about this. If you help people with workflow, not only do you reduce training for people coming in because they can walk through all the steps, but you also prevent errors because most old applications don't have guardrails to keep you from doing things out of order.
Yeah.
And
they just fail.
Yeah, they just mess up. And so if you build a separate thing for workflow, you can build those guardrails in so that don't do step 3 before you've done step 2.
There's been a few pieces of software now where I've found that as they build a breadcrumb trail at the top of the screen below the menu, of you went here, and then you went here, and you went here, and you here, and I found myself occasionally seeing that Brick Trail jump back 4 steps.
Yeah.
Make a change.
Yeah.
Be able to go back down again.
And then what does that do? What kind of ripple effect does that have? So you can design extra pieces to take that into account. And people love that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. The other one that I've always delighted is don't lose my work. Like I typed a bunch of stuff in, then something failed and so forth. And then you get back there. It's like, I have to do this over. And you get back there and it's it's still there.
I am going to give the Windows team a thumbs up on something in that area because number one, I don't like the idea that they update and reboot so much.
Yep.
Okay. They promised us a long time ago they wouldn't do that.
Can't do it.
And now they just can't figure it out. But what they did figure out is that pretty much any app that they control, they've got ways to save the state. Even Notepad. Notepad used to just, if you rebooted after an update, whatever was in that Notepad was gone.
Well, Windows 11 would block the update. You would block the reboot, right?
So
but
they
in Windows
fixed
11 they added the memory tabs.
And it works on my Windows 10 updates as well. That if nowadays I guess they backported it or something, but now if they do a forced update because of a forced reboot because of an update, then when I come back, all my notepads are back. They're fine. And
that's
thank
good.
you, Microsoft Windows.
It's a good
10.
feature, and it's a great thing to think about in your software too. Like you talk about design that pays. It's like how much work saved that way, how much frustration saved that way. For not that much code. Yeah,
and if you're doing, let's say, a Blazor server application, you can use protected browser storage. Anytime somebody mutates the state, just save that to protected browser storage and bring it back when you load up if it's there.
That's one of the
or give them the, hey, last time you were working on this, do you want to resume where you left off? You can even bring them to the page they were on and the data that was on that page. Well,
Carl, I think you and I tend to be tuned into that because we started out in desktop native where having a lot of state is pretty easy.
Yep.
And so you get accustomed to leveraging it. Whereas people that began doing stateless web applications, which it's kind of the browser requires a certain amount of statelessness, they don't tend to leverage state as much. They just don't tend to think that way. And so, they should. We've got ways of doing the state now, and they need to kind of twist their mentality because that is such a useful thing for the user.
Sure is. Yeah. And the application state talks that I do in Blazor are still the most popular ones because, people coming from different web technologies, that's a thing that they're not used to.
Yeah.
In memory state.
And another thing about all sort of connected to all the stuff we're talking about with legacy apps and getting the workflow right and such is something that I noticed a couple of years ago. And now that I'm attuned to it, you know how it is. You notice something once and then you start seeing it in other places.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen, at least 6 or 8 examples now of this. I struggle to explain it really concisely, but I'll try. I call it generational turnover because you think about, and it's unique to this point in time because we've all been in the industry long enough that we know we went through that period when a lot of businesses were automating. They were switching from basically paper into computers for the first time, typically very data related apps. I did my first one in probably 1979. And of course it really picked up steam in the mid 80s. And by the mid 90s, you pretty much had to be automated or you weren't competitive as a business anymore.
Right.
But you think about how those apps were done. I mean, we didn't have the computing power or the expertise or the money to build what we would now call an enterprise app. And most of these companies were pretty small anyway. So what got built? Well, a piece of the app you built a piece of the business, an app for that. And then maybe another piece for another app for another piece of the business. And so the systems that came out of that in the 90s and early 2000s tended to be pretty granular, data-oriented pieces. Everything was done kind of piecemeal. How did the business function? Somebody in that business, typically a small number of people, knew how to take all of those things and implement the real workflow in the business. As we talked about before, they were holding the workflow in their head. Right. They knew when to move from app to app, and they knew all the domain knowledge to know when to bypass the app or get around limitations in the app. They knew all of that stuff. most small to medium businesses had that cadre of people. If they were successful, that probably meant that they treated those people pretty well and they hung around for a long, long time. Let's do some math. If a business automated in 1990 that way, and they've got people that know how to make all this current stuff work, but that means that there's a whole lot of information in their head that's required to make it work. If they were 30, let's say 30 years old in 1990, how old are they today?
Mm-hmm.
They are 64. I've seen in half a dozen plus businesses a small group of people who are key to the operation of the business that are all approaching retirement at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah. There's a lot of skill about to walk out the door.
There's a lot of people walking. Yeah. I mean, these people are going to go to a retirement party one day and then that expertise walks out the door that night and doesn't come back. And then
millennials will take over and write it on the lamp stack.
Yeah. Well,
lamp stack? Holy man.
Sorry.
It's even the best motivated millennials going to come in. It would take them years to build up all that domain knowledge to do this. Yeah, and the business is going to take some pretty serious hits if you don't prepare for this. So a couple of our clients, that's actually the project we were doing, was taking this string of things that were all built separately and that the people knew how to put together, and replacing that with what you would call an enterprise system. Even though, I mean, the people at SAP tell you that they can do this. And for some businesses, I think they probably can if the business is data and accounting driven enough. But if you've got proprietary business processes, then now you got a whole lot of work to do that. You can either hammer SAP into doing it, which is very expensive, or you can go get somebody to write the replacement system, which is better if you do it right, but carries a lot of risk.
Yeah.
But businesses need to be sensitized to this. I was doing that session on design for legacy apps at a conference, and talked a little bit about that, because see, the idea is you stretch the legacy app too far, there's a whole lot of risk involved there and there are various risks with legacy apps being stretched too far, but one of them is generational turnover. And I kind of went through with him about the same thing I just went through with you. I had a guy come up to me after the session and he said, the insight you just gave me is worth more than I paid to come to this conference. He's going to go back and start checking things out. Who are these people that the business depends on, that maybe the top executives don't even know who they are? And how close are they getting to retirement? And what's our plan for dealing with it?
Yeah.
Are we going to create a new app? Are we going to try to transplant that expertise into other heads? It's solved in a lot of different ways, but a lot of small, even up to pretty large businesses, because one of the businesses we did this for is a multi-billion-dollar business with 5 factories. So people ought to just do a checklist thing in your business. Are you in that boat? Because a lot of businesses are. I talked to an executive for a large bank they've got all these technologies and all the people who know how to make them work. They've got to either change out the technologies or get somebody new to keep them running.
Right.
Because those people are just about to retire.
We're all older people here. So, and I'm not, there's no secret, right? We've been around a while. Have you ever encountered somebody who says, we're going to abandon the whole application idea in favor of a series of TikTok videos?
I don't think I've ever heard anything that ridiculous.
It's coming.
But
it's coming, ladies and gentlemen.
It probably is.
I mean, there's another aspect of this, which is that the folks that have been doing this, operating that software for a while, are used to the foibles, used to the problems, used to the bad UX of it.
Yeah.
And that new folks coming in are going to have a demand to, this doesn't have to suck, right? Like that this could be better.
Yeah, you think about, say, a 24-year-old coming in for their first job, looking at one of these 25-year-old corporate apps, and they sit down the first day in front of that thing. What does that do to their connection to the company they just started working for? I mean, they don't even own a laptop or a desktop. All they know is tablets or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
Phones,
the emotional impact of that is not to be discounted.
Nope. Sure thing.
Yeah. That's an interesting point in evolution. And the demand's going to get huge as we lose this knowledge base walking on the door.
Yeah. And there is the problem is there's just no clean way to do it to solve this problem. I mean, we went into a multi-billion-dollar company and architected everything in their production process, from forecasting they needed through the entire supply chain to scheduling workers in the factories. And I don't want to sound arrogant and entitled here, but the number of teams that can go in and do that, there just aren't that many. There just are not. So the risk is very, very high when you pick a team to do that. And so I don't like being in these decision makers' shoes, because it's very career affecting if they get it wrong. Mm-hmm. And we've talked various times on .NET Rocks about the limitation of design talent. We don't have enough. We have that visual design talent, but the interaction design talent and the other types of design talent are pretty short. But as I mentioned earlier, the limitation on enterprise architecture is really high too. If you're going to do enterprise level workflow, the architecture for that, I've done it, and I know what the architecture involves. And I'm going to be honest, the average person, even a large company with architect in their title, even enterprise architect in their title, are not up to doing it. I don't mean to sound arrogant about it, but they're just not. I've talked to these people.
Mm-hmm. And so basically what you're saying is most architects are full of shit.
One of the large banks, a different one from the one I talked about before, has over 2,000 people in their technical area with the word architect in their title, on their business card. How many of those people are actually architects, do you suppose?
Well, how many can actually do the work?
How many can actually do the work?
Yeah, it's a different thing. But, again, titles are one thing, work's another.
Yeah.
Sure. So,
I would like to apologize to all the architects that listen to .NET Rocks. I wasn't talking about you. We're all cool here, right?
Yeah, well, right? Of course, the best architects, of course they listen to .NET Rocks.
Well, you're absolutely right. Self-selection, right?
Yeah, so we've got a filter there, but the number who are really good at it, I see this, for example, in the proliferation of microservices. Microservices are a good solution for some places, but in a lot of cases, they're used as an excuse for not doing architecture. It's just, we won't do enterprise architecture. We'll just do little things all over the place.
Billy, you just blew my mind. I mean, we've been struggling with this whole microservices versus the monolith, the modular monolith thing for a couple of years now, because people who went down the microservices road got disillusioned with it. And you just nailed it on the head. Some people that do microservices is an excuse to not do proper architecture up front.
Yeah. Well, it's one of my most popular slides these days is the distracted boyfriend meme.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So
boyfriend
with the guy in the middle, and he's got his
down.
Girlfriend there, but he's looking over his shoulder.
Somebody's walking by with a nice butt.
I did one of those, and the girl walking away is labeled with writing code, and his girlfriend is labeled with architecture, UX design, talking to users, because developers blow that stuff off.
And she's looking at him like, I'm going to give you such a smack.
I'm going to, yeah. So that kind of captures the psychology. We should probably put a link up for that.
That's really good. Yeah, send that to us.
That slide too. It's popular.
Very good. So what's next for you, Billy? What are you on to?
Well, I have a project that I'm starting on to do kind of a big chunk of an application, but it isn't replacing an entire one in the engineering space. And I'm looking forward to that. That's some interesting new stuff. I really like the people that I'm starting to work with too. And so that is kind of a modest size project. It isn't as big as the ones that I normally do. And then I am in general moving toward smaller projects.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know how many people really realize how old I am, but I'm reaching the point where I won't be doing the large projects that much longer. And what I find, I've talked to people at conferences, sometimes repeats over the years, and they go, yeah, we'd like to bring you in, but we haven't gotten our ducks in a row or whatever. folks, you're running out of time.
that front porch and that pitcher of iced tea is calling your name.
And it's the deadlines. Fried chicken. It's the deadlines that I'm ready to kind of move past. So I expect to be doing still some of the large projects for the next year or two.
Yeah.
And then after that, I'm going to move to smaller projects for another year or two. And then, I will never stop working, but getting on the planes and going out and seeing people and taking control, taking command of a redesign project, which again, the supply of people who can do that is just critically short. Mm-hmm. Look, you guys have been in one of the most prestigious communities in the Microsoft space for almost as long as I have, the regional director community. Mm-hmm. How many of those guys, and most of those guys have that special capability to get in front of a group that includes CEOs or whoever, high level people, and facilitate the way through to a solution. I mean, you talked about some of the contentious issues there, Carl, some of the things that come up trying to arrive at a solution that everybody's going to be happy with.
Right.
A big chunk of my work over the last 5 years has been serving in that role with companies that got stuck in one way or another, that are thrashing or whatever. Because as an outsider, you can come in and you can it doesn't bother you as much to make people mad because.
Right. And plus you have no skin in the game.
Right.
You're getting paid a rate.
So
for your opinion.
I expect to keep doing that for a while, mostly because, most of my clients who use me, they'll call me in every couple of years to get them through some project to facilitate. They'll get all the important people in the room and we'll spend 3 or 4 days just kind of getting things hammered out.
Right.
And Richard, I know you've done stuff like that with groups and the number of people who could do that is so limited that, my clients are probably going to still be begging me to do that in 5 or 6 years.
I tell you what, I love my small business customers. I love working for small businesses because there's just so fewer layers and politics. I mean, Richard's kind of a political creature, but I don't like that at all.
Not kinda.
Well, yeah, you are. You're right. Not kinda. Absolutely. He thrives in a political environment, but not me.
If I were advising some of the people here about, because you talked about people becoming architects because that's the promotion path or whatever. Yeah. They should be building a talent stack, and learning how to facilitate is a potential layer in that talent stack.
No. And it's the thing is people who want to move in that space, we've got to do a better job of letting them be good at it and letting them be able to learn again. Right. I feel the same way watching folks bounce between PMing and direct dev, where it's like, I love someone who wants to do both jobs. Like sometimes you want to write the code. Sometimes you want to help other people write the code.
Yeah.
Like both are rewarding gigs. Yeah. It's just, do we give room for folks to be able to change and to, have to get up to speed and give them appropriate projects? It can't be linear. It's not a linear process.
But we don't, as you said, we don't invest as much in helping people move in that direction as we should. And if I were to suggest the very first starting point, it would be learning how to listen better. Mm-hmm. Because in general, human beings are bad at listening. Developers are human beings. So most of them are
what'd you
not
say?
good at listening.
Did you say something?
Goodness.
So
you do that to my wife, I get a dope slap.
No.
So there are various resources for that. That might be another link if I can remember to put it on there to get some listening resources for people. There's a book called the Charisma Myth that has an entire chapter on listening with some exercises.
Wow.
That I think is worthwhile. Very cool. We need to help people move in that direction. Now I'm going to be kind of, again, candid about it, just as I was with some of the architectural stuff. Some people don't have I call it presence, I guess, to be in that group and keep control of it. It's kind of an inborn thing. And so you want to, if you're going to move in that direction, you have to have that inner confidence that you can talk to people on their level, even if no matter where they are, that you can talk to them as equals. Listen to them, but also tell them when you think they're wrong and work through disagreements and such. Some people just worry too much about other people's feelings.
Yep.
And so it's very hard for them to step into that facilitation role. But if you can do that, and I don't mean that you have to be a jerk. I don't feel like I'm a jerk, for example, but you do have to be able to challenge people. That's a phrase, just a free tip for people who are in this, that when they say something you disagree with, don't say, I disagree with that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Say, I challenge that.
Mm-hmm.
Or say
notice
yes and.
Notice the different psychology there.
And it helps to have a sense of humor, right,
wrong,
Billy?
Yeah.
You're saying, I'm not sure that you're right about that, so let's invite some more discussion of it.
And it helps to have a sense of humor, right, Billy?
I'd like to think so.
Yeah, I think so too. All right. Well, we've wasted another hour and 4 minutes of your precious life.
I hope it wasn't a waste. It was great. I had
listening to this lousy show. No, I'm kidding. So thank you, Billy. It's been great as always.
You're welcome. I got to talk about a lot of stuff I was interested in, and I hope people find some value in it.
I look forward to our next in-person meeting as well as our next .NET Rocks meeting. So thanks again. And we'll talk to you, dear listener, next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and, of course, in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a